Again, thank you for joining us for identifying risk in key areas of senior living. Just wanted to remind you today that all phones are muted. We are going to use chat to submit any questions, and there will be a Q&A at the end. I'd like to go ahead and welcome our presenter, Mary Beth Ormiston. She is currently our Manager of Program Strategy here at Dude Solutions. And prior to this position, she was employed by the Redwoods Group as Director of Risk Management, where she was responsible for supervising a team of risk management consultants, where she developed and initiated risk management initiatives for membership organizations in reducing losses. Prior to this position, she was a YMCA CEO for 33 years. Melding her membership operational experience alongside her risk management expertise, she is a well-respected speaker, presenter, and problem solver. Mary Beth, we're very excited to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. This is going to be a great opportunity to learn more about risk.
The conference has been muted.
In our senior living communities. And I hope that you'll know that we're going to be doing a pretty deep dive into risk. We're not going to be able to cover everything. So unfortunately, I always share, we're going to have some unfinished business. In what we're going to be doing today, I hope that if there are key points that you want to go back and revisit, that you take a moment and you write some notes down, because many times we are going to create a checklist of what we do, what we can do, and it's helpful, I think, for question and answer if you have an opportunity to jot down some ideas. But what we're going to do today, we're going to identify those potential risks that are in your particular communities, and we're going to break them down by functional area. Now, unfortunately, there are lots of functional areas that we could be talking about, and so this is just our first stab at some of the high priority areas where we see incidences occurring and where these incidents appear on your loss runs and do cost you money in some cases. And we're going to review those best practices around risk prevention and awareness. Understanding best practices are a guideline, and they allow us to have goals. And in some cases, depending on what our communities look like, we have to be able to moderate and modify, but it's best to know what are those risk practices that are generally practiced. And we're going to discuss how having well-communicated risk management plans in place and how they provide a positive impact to your safety, your reputation, which is your brand, and your occupancy, and that's those people that you serve. Now, saying all that, this is a picture of a senior living community. It could be yours. It could be one that you are very familiar with, because we understand every senior living community has its own culture, has its own footprint. But at the end of the day, we have employees that we have hired that we want them to do a specific job. We have residents that are paying for a service. And saying all that, we have a responsibility. Management has a responsibility to make sure that all entities have a quality of life and are safe. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And it's what I call the golden opportunity. The golden opportunity allows us to be able to talk about those folks that we serve and also those people that we hire, because we do understand that they are special in what we do. Our senior living communities are now having a higher percentage of senior Americans than we've ever seen before. In every avenue of everything we do, we are getting older. And that means that in our communities, we have those members that are living well into their 80s and their 90s, and maybe even further. And they might be coming to us younger because they are preparing for a life of care in communities such as we're talking about today. So it's a wide range of people. And you know by the population that you serve that a person in their 70s might have completely different needs than a person in their 90s. And therefore, as we look at that continual care, as we look at those risks that are implied, we have to understand from a staff perspective and also from our residents' perspective what it is that we need to be able to do. So the kind of the basic principles of what I kind of like to frame out there, kind of the clouds you might say, as we talk about risk management, is that we need to have appropriate staff training, ongoing, sustainable, viable training that protects our staff. Because if we don't have our staff, it is difficult to do the work we need to do and is expected of us to do with those that are living within our communities. We also need to protect our organization and our brand because we live and breathe, we use the opportunities in our community. Our communities look towards us to be active and to be part of a caring, serving community. We're not out there as an island. We are integrated as part of a community, and so our brand is very important. And of course, whatever we do with risk management, we need to always keep at the highest level our residents to make sure that what we're doing with them, there is no harm coming to them, and that we are looking proactively at those things that we can do to keep them safe. Now, sometimes that's easier said than done. So I kind of wanted to start today with transportation, and there's a reason why I wanted to start with transportation. You know, because we talked about we have folks of a couple of different decades, because we have folks that might be living in our communities that are 60, 70, 80, or 90. The expectation of just staying in the community is different. Folks that are part of our communities, we hope that we are integrating in the community by shopping, those that have the ability to do other opportunities. And many of them have given up that right to drive. And they look to us to be able to provide safe transportation to do things that give them quality of life. Now that's great. But the other issue is that some of our greatest risk happens in transportation. We need to continue to remember that no matter what vehicle we're doing and using, whether we own it and whether we lease it, whether we borrow it, or we have volunteers and staff who use their own personal vehicles, we have liability. And there's different levels of liability by the kinds of vehicles that we use. So let's talk about that a little bit. As we prepare and we think about the vehicles that are in our communities, and I'm going to talk first about 12 and 15 passenger vans. 12 and 15 passenger vans have been declared by the National Transportation Safety Council as being one of the most unsafe modes of transferring residents. There's lots of reasons, and most of it has to do with balance and rollover capabilities. We know that minibuses or something around that kind of definition are by far safer as we look to transport those that want to partake in our community in a variety of different ways. So if we are transporting residents from one location to another, it means that we need to have a driver who is very knowledgeable and has the ability to care not only for what they are driving, but for the needs of those that are part of being transported. I think it's a good habit is to have a transportation committee. I think that can be a small committee consisting of a few staff and maybe your maintenance workers, because on any given day, if we have an activity plan, I always say Murphy's Law is the first to come into play. And those that are familiar with Murphy's Law means that if you're going to a play in the afternoon and you're taking a handful of residents, the person that is scheduled to take them probably had an emergency. And you have a group of people who are very much looking forward to going to this activity, and now we have to look to somebody else to drive. And so the question comes, what does that look like as we look at a transportation policy? If we have a committee that has worked to put something together that helps outline what it is that we can and can't do in transporting our residents, it certainly makes life a lot easier. Now, checking driving records of all that drive and even volunteers. And I also want to bring up one just little criteria here or thought for you to consider. Even if you have volunteers that are looking to put people in cars, I would address that very strongly in your policies, because volunteers also need to have all of the checks just like a paid staff. The only difference is that they are a volunteer and they're not receiving a paycheck, but they must pass the same requirements as anybody that is on your current staff. And I'm going to dive deeper into that in just a moment. And we never take for granted, do we, that a person, just because they have the appropriate credentials to drive, are good drivers. We look at our kids, look at who we see on the highways. I always encourage anybody that is going to drive the vehicle, for whoever, whether it is the executive director or whomever you so designate, go out and do a trial run with that person. Make sure that they do, in fact, understand the workings of the vehicle they're going to drive, that they, in fact, are in tune and are able to do what it is that you want them to do with that vehicle. Don't assume that they're great drivers, because that isn't always the case, as I'm sure you have stories about that. So this vehicle is just an example of what the National Transportation Council recommends that we transport our folks in. Something similar to this. There are other models, but it allows us to be able to have lifts. It allows us to be able to handle wheelchairs, where if we're using a 12 and 15 passenger van, it's much more limiting. And then on top of that, we certainly have the issues of speed and the unsafeness of the balance of a 12 or 15 passenger van. I do have a real bias towards that. So we know that by looking at the data that most accidents occur with drivers under 25. That doesn't surprise us. And it probably doesn't surprise us to say over 70. Now, does that mean that we don't hire those folks? No, it does not. It really means that we have to do comprehensive background checks on all staff, and I'm going to include volunteers, because we want to make sure that they have a national and state criminal check. Why do we do that? And the reason that we do that is that we want to make sure that we have no one that's been charged with any kind of abuse. We always think of child abuse. We know elder abuse is very concerning. We want to make sure that the people that we hire have a clean MVR record. It always helps to look at the credit because that tells a story. Making sure that they have a Social Security identity number, and to look for any past employment and also their education search, and to compare that to the application that they have filled out. I always suggest that volunteers fill out the same application that a staff member fills out that's going to be employed, because you are going to be requiring them to do many of the same functions. The screening should include the sexual offender screening from a county and federal courthouse or in some cases state. We also need to be looking at worker compensation and if in fact they're going to be driving, be able to pass the drug screening and any kind of reference checking. Reference checking should be documented and placed in the personnel file. It is something that we just don't pick up the phone and have a conversation and ask, is this a nice person? But we want to make sure that, and I like to have a reference from not only a professional, but from a family. And the reason why is that many times that we have learned is a family member, if there is a skeleton in the closet, does not want to have anything happen to the people that this person might be in contact with. Complete job descriptions for all positions, and that would include transportation, I think is a must. And have your job description signed, which means that they in fact have taken a look at it, you've had a conversation. Moving on, as we talk about staff, because staff is only as good as who we hire and train. And when we talk about a training program, we have pre-training, we have CEs many times that have to be completed. But the best training program of all is the training program that is ongoing. Having modules in our staff meetings, having a 5-minute training sometimes is as effective as having a half an hour training. Continual training all of the time, which allows me to go back and say, which I forgot to say to you, that when you are working in transportation, I like to do a subtype of screen every 2 years. Because even after you hire somebody, something can happen that without going back and continuing to screen, without pulling a record, you would not know about. So even though you've done your hire and you've screened them, go back every other year and you can create in your policy what it is that you want to check. And the minimal that you want to check is drug and their MVR, to see what has happened. Everybody receives hopefully a personnel handbook, and in that handbook I always suggest that you sit with a person, that there is some type of new hire so that you're going through, and at the end of that, that is signed and placed in the personnel file. Today's hiring procedures are so different than what they were just a few years ago. There are more wrongful termination suits that are being filed in the area of human resources than we've ever seen before. And so we want to make sure that all of our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed, of course. When we talk about employee safety, which is, and we are going to talk about our resident safety, but the first thing we're going to talk about is employee, because if our employees are not safe, then we don't have people that care for our residences. And if, in fact, if our employees are getting hurt, the chances are that we have areas where residents, they too can be hurt. Slip, trips, and falls, as we shared in the other webinar, is the number one area where our residents get hurt and our staff get hurt. So we do know that as we look at our facility and think in your head, write your notes, where do we have non-skid surfaces? How do we treat that? What are our products? And if we have had occurrences, how are we dealing with them? Do we review those in staff meeting so that we understand where we have an opportunity to make a difference? Foot protection, those people that come to work in flip-flops, those people that come to work in sandals, we'd really prefer that you have closed-toe shoes because there's all kinds of things that can happen just from stubbing your toe to hitting something. And for those of you that have had a broken toe, you know that's almost as painful as having a broken foot. And so closed-toe shoes. Lifting and back problems in this arena are huge. We want to make sure that all of our staff has passed and continues to take training in appropriate lifting. And you know, we bend from the knees, we lift from the legs, and when we see something in somewhere that we need help, particularly if we have a resident that needs assistance, we ask for help. We don't do it all by ourselves. The other areas, because we have kitchens with all kinds of hand tools, we have maintenance that has all kinds of hand tools. Everybody that uses a hand tool really needs to be trained on it. We need to make sure that cords are intact. We need to make sure everything is grounded, just in case that we would have water or exposed wires, so that no one has a chance of being hurt. Now, what I thought I'd do today, just because I wanted to keep everybody real active, and so I'm going to flip back and forth and show you a couple of slides here. This is what OSHA is suggesting for our curb cutouts. We've had different kinds of curb cutouts over the years, but these are the type that are now being what OSHA is suggesting that we look at. We have lots of curb cutouts at our facilities because we have wheelchairs going down to get into vehicles. Do we have the proper kind? These are the non-skid, the straight edge, slippery ones where water runs down makes it very difficult for people to step out of a chair, or if they're with a walker. This allows for a much more grip for folks that need that. So think about where in your facility, where are your curb cutouts, and how do they look? And do we have any places where our cement, our sidewalks, our parking lots have settled? You know, and I'm a great example of this. I think sometimes I could trip over a thread. Well, that's what happens in our facilities. So do we take a constant look at where we have raised concrete or where we have a division and a split? Because we really need to figure out how it is that we can take a look at that and do something with that. And my perfect one. Now look at this. Look real hard at this. This is steps. This is what happens when we think we're doing what's right. These are steps, and even though it says watch your step, to have carpet all of the same color certainly allows for people with eye problems, and I don't have an eye problem. And when I saw this in a facility, I went, oh my. So what can we do? Well, we can put grips on the steps. We can outline each step, though I certainly agree that not always does the yellow or the orange tape look the best. But after all, it's about what works best so that our residents and our staff don't get hurt. And even though we have this watch your step, it is still very, very difficult to see what has happened. I'm constantly getting questions and comments about mats. And so here's going to be my take and the conversation I want to have with you about mats in your facility. Yes, in fact, mats can be helpful. Yes, in fact, mats can be detrimental. And it does depend on where you're using them, how you're maintaining them, and the kinds of mats that you get. In older facilities that have the 2x2 tile with a slick tile or a non-grout tile on your floor, sometimes mats can be helpful. but mats tend to be a trip hazard. They tend to curl, but they also can protect and help on slippery areas. Look at your facility. Look where you want to put them. Do you have handrails on the side? That could help. Sometimes mats are of assistance, and depending on what kind you get, they have to be changed often because water gets underneath them, bacteria grows. So I'm not telling you not to use them, but I am sharing with you, look very carefully at how you use them. And this is where your staff and your residents can be of help to you. You know, ask for their opinion. Take a look, watch, have people tripped over them? Are they helpful? So that at the end of the day, mats can be helpful, but they also can be a detriment, and you need to look carefully at how it is you're using them. I know you probably wanted me to be more definitive on that, but that's difficult. So here's the other kind of mat. We have mats that as you enter the door because of rain, snow, and all of those things. Again, a larger mat is usually more helpful than a small mat because it does allow for a longer walking distance so that people can see where the mat ends and where it begins. You don't want your mats the same color of your floor. And again, they need to be well maintained so that they don't slip and they don't curl. But when you have, I think a lot of facilities that I have been in are either looking at a different kind of tile or carpet on the floor or a mat. So whatever you use, make sure that it is doing what you want it to do and that's not a trip and fall hazard. As we move along and we talk about employee safety, I want to talk about ladders. Whether you're talking about the 4-foot ladders or the 6-foot ladders, 8-foot ladders, anytime, in my opinion, that you're going to use a ladder or need to use a ladder, you also need to have a spotter. But here's the other thing, and I see this in kitchens. I see them in storage areas. It is so much easier, isn't it, just to pull up a chair or do something like that, and so you're kind of shaky on the chair and you're trying to grab it because time is short. I'd really encourage everybody as a training tool, as a reinforcement to each other, to continually get out a ladder. If it's a small step ladder, of course you don't need a spotter, but a step ladder is certainly more appropriate than that shaky chair or that table that is not appropriate to stand on, because if you're hurt, you're hurting others in your organization. And stress. Would you have thought that part of employee safety was stress? Well, actually it is, and that's the importance of a planned workload. And that's the importance of keeping staff safe. Now think back, and because I do know this happens. On any given day, you have a staff member that gets caught in traffic. You have an employee that maybe calls in late because they're sick, and it throws your ratios off, right? Because we are all very attuned to our ratios and how many people we have working doing this and doing that. A planned workload and appropriate employee safety helps with the stress of everyone. Because if one person is having to do the job of two, they're less effective. And when they're less effective, the more chance for an issue to occur. You know, we talked about at the last webinar, minding the gap. And every time that we deviate from our protocols and we do our practices, the more chances that we have for an incident. We have frequency and then we have severity. Also, when we're using power tools, make sure that we are using appropriate gear. I have a kind of a funny story. I had a cook in one of the facilities that I was talking to, and was using the big power mixer, and she said, "Do you think I need to use eye goggles?" And I said, "Well, only if you had me at the controls." But we need to make sure that if we're outside that we have the proper protective equipment, long pants, work boots, a cap, long sleeve, if we're, in areas where we have, whether it be bugs, animals, or whatever, and sun, whatever we're doing, we need to make sure that we take time to use the appropriate gear. Our signs, many times we think signs are there because we're told that we're regulated to have them, and that is correct. But the signs are made to help be pivotal points of reminders. So we want to make sure that we post signs and we post our posters in the area that is appropriate. And we want to make sure that they're current, that the edges are not curled, that we can only read half of what they say. Signs are there as eye indicators that says these are the behaviors that we want to promote. And so let's use them in that particular fashion. This was the mixture I was talking about. We need to make sure whether it's this type of mixer in our kitchen or whether it's at our stoves, whatever it is that we're using with knives, that we have the proper equipment and that we have trained so that we're not just taking somebody into the area where we have tools, whether they be power tools, electrical tools, or whatever, and we haven't shown them properly how to use that particular equipment. Now let's talk about in our facilities, some of the areas of concern. Every area, every room has something, but let's talk about doors and windows because it is important that we have the proper locking devices that work, that they're not rusted, that they allow for, if we have to unlock and lock, that we are keeping our residents safe. And every facility is a little different because of the age. So we need to make sure they are in working order. And that we have a policy on our exterior doors that whether it's the fire department, whoever in our community has been by to do their inspection, that they're locked, that we haven't taken a shortcut out to get to the garbage bins. And if the case is that we haven't, relocked them, we need to make sure that we have a system of checking. And we also understand the importance of those late nights. Do we have staff that are actually making rounds? And do we know for sure that that's happening? Now, for those that have kind of low level, or I call them basement windows, to make sure that they are protected by and meeting the code of the county or the city that we're in. Sometimes bars are allowed, sometimes it's mesh, and sometimes there's other means. Do we know exactly what they are? And so we were talking about doors, and I was greatly surprised about this. This is a facility that I recently visited, and they do not have handicap doors. So anybody that is living there wants to come and go. Someone, if they're in a chair or in a scooter or using a walker, or sometimes, these are heavy doors, somebody has to help them. So we need to always evaluate our facility. What are those upgrades that we need to make, and how do we prioritize them, and how do we build them into budgets? And I know that for those of you that are executive directors that are on this call, I do know that you walk your facilities. And I think it's also helpful that you're having those kinds of conversations with your residents because they too will tell you, hopefully, those additions that need or can be added and are very helpful in that respect. Other areas of concern have to do with lights. Lights are so important in our communities. because there is a section of interior lights that need to be left on at night so that we don't have shadows, that we can clearly see hallways, that we can clearly see exits. And if appropriate, timing devices are very helpful in going into multi-purpose rooms instead of having a switch, so that we know that when somebody's in there that the timing has turned it on, or it has been activated in some other means. Security alarms, there's all different kinds that can be installed. Make sure that, however, that they are installed by a licensed contractor, that they're part of your inspection process, and that whatever system you have covers all of the primary hazardous points in your particular facility. And even though the testing can be scary, I think residents appreciate knowing that you are testing them. They're part of the communication so that they can expect it, because they want to know, one of the frights, and you know this, of being in a facility is that they want to know that they're safe. And so we need to share that with them. And that's why our defibrillators, we need to, on a monthly basis, be looking at our defibrillator, checking our pads to make sure they're not outdated, making sure that the battery is actively charged. And whether you contract that out or it's part of your safety committee or a person has this, there needs to be some type of documentation that the AED is current. There have been many times that I've been on investigations when something has happened and it is an insurance claim, and that we are training our staff that if we have an emergency, that they can activate the AED and it comes with you. And that is a training in the height of an emergency, making sure that folks understand how important that is. And as we talk about building access, this is very key to the safety of everyone. We want our residents to know what the procedures are. What time is the door locked? How is it locked? How do we access it if we have late visitors or whatever? Making sure that they understand the rules and that we are not deviating from them. And also communicating, because my guess is that they're off limits to some areas, and those off limits need to be secured, and they're not open all the time at 24 hours. And that we have set personnel at certain times during the day that are constantly checking the exits and the entrances and the windows, and that we're making sure that when the majority of our staff leaves at night, that our facility is safe and secure for all. And that's for residents and staff. We know this is a different kind of world, and there's things that unfortunately staff bring baggage to work, and so we are protecting our staff and we're protecting those that live with us. And we have valuables. We have valuables that need to be locked up and need to be secured, from petty cash to prescriptions. We have very precise med policies that we need to follow and should not be deviated from. And they have a designated area in staff who only have access to them. And the same thing for protecting those valuables that our residents bring. Everything they bring into the door represents their life. And so we need to make sure that those are secure from other people that might come in, from other residences perhaps, and from staff perhaps. Again, keeping them as safe as can be. This was just a system that I saw that was used as a lockbox for a lot of different reasons. And so they are available and can be used. Going back to our facilities and how we keep them safe, this happens to be the lip going into a shower. And so as we access and we take a look at our resident rooms, how is it that we're making sure that they have every safety opportunity? This had not been cut out, and so it means that a person had to have the ability to be able to step up and step down onto a tile floor. So that's not impossible for all of our residents, but for those that need assistance and are in a particular room, we need to make sure that that particular area fits the resident that is living there. The same goes for key control. When we talk about keys, now again, I'm only talking about best practices. Every facility has a different kind of a policy, but I do believe you have to have a key control program. However your master key, who has it, what are the door locks, and to make sure that you have records for everyone in the organization who has a key, particularly when somebody leaves and or is terminated, that the key has a serial number on it so that you can track it, and to make sure that we're not hiding keys inside or out, that we know exactly where they are, and that, as I indicated earlier, that when employees are terminated, locks or combinations are changed immediately. Again, this is for the protection of everybody. This is the dreaded white plastic chair, which obviously should not be allowed in our facilities. Now, you want to know where I see this? I see these chairs out on the patio sometimes. I sometimes see them in the pool area, but I call these the dreaded white plastic chairs. And if you have these in your facility, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but if you do have these, this is something that you should discard because there's other methods much better than this. So why do I have lockers? Because lots of times we have locker space for our staff. We need to make sure that lockers are secured to the wall. And even if they have lockers, additional space sometimes for storage areas for our residents, make sure that if they have the opportunity to tip, that they are bolted to the wall, and that they have access to them limited to only who owns them or can put their stuff in it. Resident rooms, again, in most places, will have a key or some type of mechanism. So if a resident leaves, they can feel safe by locking their premises. And obviously, we know that the call buttons, the pulls, are available where it makes sense in their areas of living, primarily someplace in their main living area, in their bathrooms, of course. And that bathrooms are equipped with the appropriate handrails and non-skid surfaces. The handrails now, I like these new handrails now where you can get the grips, because sometimes a frail person who has a small hand has a very difficult time grabbing the handrail and your hand not sliding. But if you have grips on them, it makes it a lot easier. And again, going back to the white plastic chair, let's make sure all of our furnishings are what I call senior friendly. In terms, they don't easily slide. They have sturdy arms. They allow for the arms for somebody to push up. And so we want to make sure that everything in our common areas, in our dining rooms, tables that don't tip, that we have the appropriate type of furnishings for our folks. And these are just giving some examples that you are also familiar with in bathrooms, so that we are allowing folks the freedom and the quality of life to live, and to make sure that that we have this. Again, the person here had a washcloth because she was having trouble gripping the handrail, and if there were grips on it, would have made it a lot different. And the pools, making sure that they are accessed all of the time. But what we're talking about is really quality of life. And so within the walls that we have in this environment, we have programs. And because we want people to live out their life with as much quality as possible. And so we have a variety of different programs that we hope are suitable for those folks that we're serving. So we need to make sure that we have policies that address them, and that we understand the changing dynamics and the population shifts and the external events and the internal events. And these should be constantly reviewed and constantly changing because life is about change. And as communities create these programs, it's always wonderful when we can create the champions that work to help sustain them. Just a real fast, can you tell me if you have a fitness area within your facility? Just a quick yes or no. I'd like to know that as we go to the next part. So just give me that indication. Because we're going to talk about exercise areas. I do believe that we do need to have exercise areas, but I feel very strongly that they need to be visible and not isolated. Sometimes we take an open area that's clear down at the end of the hall and where not everybody can see, and we put a few donated, in some cases, pieces of exercise equipment. Exercise equipment needs to be age appropriate with attention to placement. We need to know exactly within the area of where it is appropriate so that a person that loses their balance may not fall against another piece of equipment, may not fall against the wall. I do think that we need to consider handrails in those areas. We have to have a notification type of system. But we need to train our residents and our staff in how to use the equipment. Now, whether you buy or lease your equipment is totally up to you. I'm seeing more and more facilities that are leasing their equipment. And the reason for that, when you lease the equipment, the manufacturer or the supplier will also maintain the equipment for you. So if you have a piece of equipment and you don't have to keep an inventory of parts, and that they make periodic checks to make sure that the equipment is working. So what is age-appropriate equipment? Well, I think you can have a type of treadmill for some if it is maintained, and if you have an attendant or somebody that understands and has a release for who can use it. I think recumbent bikes are a great, a lot of facilities have the recumbent bikes because they're easy for people to get on and off. They don't hurt the back. They're easy on the legs. Some type of exercise balls. Now, look at this particular room with mats that people can step over. Weights, I think, are probably inappropriate. Sometimes some hand weights of the 5 pounds and 10 pounds I see for exercise classes. If you have an exercise area, it is very, very helpful to have talk to a professional in your community to help you with that. And there are many professionals, whether it be a fitness club in town, a YMCA, or anything like that, they'll gladly help you with what you need to do. Don't do it alone. That's their expertise, but I think this is a type of area that adds quality of life, particularly since we're keeping people are aging and staying in our facilities longer. Now, tell me the next question is let me know, do you have a pool that's on site, whether it be a therapy pool or some type of pool that your residents can use. Aquatics is one of the best ways and the best exercise for people of all ages. Whether you have a warm water pool, it is awesome for all of the people in your community. Most of them are billed as shallow water. Don't do this alone either. Need to have a CPO that's licensed, that takes care of your chemicals and the care of your pool. And that could either be somebody on staff or it can be contracted. Again, making sure that your non-slip tiles are used in grips along the pool, and however it is you're going to transport from the resident area through a bathroom, locker room, however that's going to happen, to make sure that those floors don't collect water. And if you are going to have more than 3 to 4 people in your pool, I do suggest that you have a certified lifeguard. And I'm going to show you why here. A certified lifeguard helps maintain the pool area because they understand equipment, and they do also understand in helping to maintain all of the emergency things that you need. So as you look at a pool, you know that you have to have appropriate steps, handrails, lifts, and ramps. And if you have people, depending on the size, in a variety of different areas in your pool, a lifeguard is, I think, essential. If you are allowing residents to bring in guests, I think there is no question that you need to have a certified lifeguard who is overseeing it, even if you post a sign that says swim at your own risk. I think that a person trained as a lifeguard, certified to do water activities, will add quality to what it is that you are offering in your community. So I'm going to show you something. This is a shallow water pool. This is what the bottom of the pool looks like if you have 5 to 6 people in the pool. This is how water churns. So you may recognize somebody on the bottom of the pool. You may not, because there are people who are in our pool that can have a heart attack, they can have a seizure. There's all kinds of medical events that happen. And sometimes it's difficult to see if you have numerous people in there of what is their status. So with just a few people in the water, this is what your water looks like. Now, as you take more people out, it becomes more evident that there's something at the bottom of the pool. And as you empty the pool and you see clear water, water that's not churned, it's just like the same old, you drop a pebble into a glass of water and you see the rings. This is why we need trained personnel in the aquatic area. The aquatic area is a dangerous area, and we need to make sure that we have qualified people in it. So what have we been talking about today? We've been talking about documentation, and we've been talking about communication. Everything that we do, we want to make sure that we document, and we want to make sure then we communicate it. And after we communicate it, we want to document it again. And we want to continue with our ongoing training, continue to document what we do, how we do it, and we want to communicate it internally and externally, because after all, we are an integral part of our communities. So just a simple way of this is why we communicate, is to make sure that we're all on the same page, doing the same thing, going after the same goals all of the time. If you'd like to speak to anybody about the Works Hub, we'd like to hear about that, and so just fill out any of these things, and we'll get that taken care of. We are coming to the end of our time, but I wanted to make sure that whether you had any questions, we've gone really fast. I hope it's been very helpful to you. We've talked about some key risk areas. We've talked about some high-level things that you can immediately do. Hopefully it has, on your little sheet of paper, that you've jotted down some notes that maybe you don't know the answers to that you're going to go check. But we want to hear from you to see if you have any burning questions.
Thank you, Mary Beth. That was a great presentation. It looks like we have time for maybe one question. Would you advocate residents being included in risk training?
Absolutely. I think that the folks that we have living in our senior centers want to be safe, and they want to be part of the solution and not always part of the problem. And so I think that with them understanding sometimes what they do may be unsafe, the education needs to be full circle, Wendy. I think it's very helpful. And our seniors all want to learn. And so why not have a session on safety or risk and involve them instead of being reactive? Because what usually happens, something happens and we say, well, why did you do that? Why did you do that? And so if in fact we can make them part of the solution, I think it's helpful, and it makes them feel worthy.
Right, makes sense. So I think we'll go with one more question. How often do you think staff should be retrained? How often should that occur?
Great. I think that staff needs to be retrained continually. Now, depending on what the training is, I think that you set that out in your training schedule for the year. So, for instance, we know CPR is once a year. We may decide on safe driving. Maybe those that drive, maybe we're going to have a reminder every 6 months. I think just because when a person is hired on that we do a training and we don't do any other training from now till whenever, I think it's ongoing, but I think you outline it as part of your policies and procedures, and you say, these are the areas. Safe lifting, we're going to do a training every year. Hazardous communication, maybe that's once a year. But we're going to commit it as part of our policy that we're going to do ongoing types of training. I also think that there's smaller bites that you can take, that you can do smaller pieces based on the incidences that you see that you can do at staff meetings. But training, thanks for bringing that up, because I think we can always, we can never do too much training. Never.
Perfect. Well, thanks everybody who joined us today. We appreciate you taking the time. Hope you learned as much as I did today. So please let us know if you have any questions, and we hope to see you at the next.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Mary Beth.